This is what's on Mike's mind here on Your Dark Companion, and I'm here to tell you today about something that has been on my mind for quite a few days now, probably about a week or so. I've literally wanted to do nothing except get to the end of this book that I'm reading, because number one, it's a horrible, sad yet fascinating tale of mental breakdowns, schizophrenia, being in the wrong scene at the wrong time, with too much stuff available to you to foster these things. It's a story about that, and it's also a story about horrifically wasted talent. The book is called Drums and Demons: The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon was one of the most prolific drummers in rock and roll. And I say was because he died not too terribly long ago, but he had been inactive for quite some time now. In his time of productivity, he was one of the most prolific drummers in rock and roll. He was a guy that you were making a record, get him, you wanted him on your record. He was good. He was really good. He was one of the most oft-recorded, most heard drummers imaginable. He was that good. He was a guy from Southern California, grew up there back in the 50s and 60s, and he fell into the scene of music out there and fell into the scene of studio musicians. And before long, he had made enough connections, met with the right people, been in the right place at the right time, to where he was on everything. Everybody wanted him on their record. The list of songs that Jim Gordon has played on would absolutely stun a mastodon. He was a guy who had it all. He was tall, he was good looking, girls loved him, and if you needed a track done, he could get it done the first time. And that's what everybody in the studio music scene is looking for. Guys who can come in, get it done on first take, and then you go on about your business and finish the thing. Jim Gordon could do that. Later on, he decided he was bored with the studio scene and he wanted to try his luck in bands. Well, that worked out really well for him too, because he wound up playing on the Joe Cocker Mad Dogs and Englishmen tour, which was the first time I ever saw him play when he came through here with them in Fair Park back in the, 1970 or so that must have been. And he was playing with Jim Keltner, another great drummer. They were doing the two drummer thing. And I was sitting up high, but I couldn't take my eyes off Jim Gordon. I knew very little about him, but I was watching him play and thinking, man, that's what I wish I was. I was a drummer back then. And I was thinking that was what I wanted to be like. I was watching him play. I was watching how perfect he was. I was watching his technique. And before long, I found out that I'd heard him play on so many songs that I could identify him on a record without knowing for sure whether that was him or not. But just by his technique, just by his sound, just by the way he played, I could tell you whether or not you were listening to Jim Gordon. Chances are you were, because before he got to Mad Dogs and Englishmen, he had played on everything with everybody. He was one of the busiest studio drummers in the Los Angeles scene. And like I say, he got tired of that, decided he wanted to get into a situation where he could play live a little bit more, and went out with Joe Cocker. After that, he hooked up with Eric Clapton, and he did the Derek and the Dominoes thing. He is all over the Layla album. The Layla album by Derek and the Dominoes is probably the album that I've come closest to wearing out just from overplaying it. The reason I overplayed it was because after I'd memorized every sound on it, I would go back and focus completely on Jim Gordon. I would have loved it if there would have been a way for me to get isolated tracks on him and try to emulate everything he did. Well, as things went on, as it turns out, he was battling some demons along the way. He got into just about every drug you could, but bigger and larger and more impactful than that, he was battling mental things. I've not gotten to this part of the book yet, but I believe he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And the longer things went, the worse it got, the more unpredictable he got, and he reached a point to where you just couldn't depend on him anymore. And as things turned out, it was because of the schizophrenia. He reached a point where he was having voices in his head. And one of the voices he heard was that of his mother. And finally, one night in a big schizophrenic episode, told him that what he needed to do was to go kill his mother. And he did. And he was arrested, tried for the murder of his mother, and was sent to prison. And that's where he spent the rest of his days. And from what I understand, I haven't gotten this far in the book yet, but from what I understand and what I've heard and everything that I know about it, he stopped going to parole hearings because he was totally okay with the scene of being in prison. He thought prison calmed him down, kept him safe, could have gotten out and started over again in one way or the other many times while he was in prison, but it was believed that he had reached a point where he was comfortable there. He liked it there, and that's where he stayed for the rest of his days. And Jim Gordon died in prison on March 13th of 2023 at the age of 77. As a drummer, he was one of a kind, but it just goes to show that there's always something going on with people that you don't know anything about. It's one of the saddest stories in rock and roll, and to me, this guy meant everything. It just goes to prove that you see these guys up there, you think you know them, you don't know them. You don't know nothing. All you know is what you see. What you see more than likely is not going to be the real them.